Hello and welcome back to the show. So I am super excited today to be sitting down here with my guest, Paul David Thompson. Paul is a real estate investor, a best-selling author, and a real estate coach on top of all of that. And today we'll be talking all about how you can find that moment in your life where you realize that you should be doing a little bit more than you are doing right now. And Paul's going to be sharing his story and all the experience that he has. So, Paul, without further ado, I want to welcome you to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So, before we get started into anything, would you mind just kind of sharing your story a little bit, telling us a little bit about you and your background and how you got to be this full-time investor, full-time coach, and even been featured on the Bigger Pockets podcast? So,
Yeah, that's right. So I started my career as an engineer and I worked my way up the corporate ladder. And about 15 years into that career, I realized I had been climbing the wrong ladder all along. And I needed some sort of a wake up call, this kind of come to Jesus moment, so to speak, that to make me realize that I'd really been kind of phoning in things for a while, and I really hadn't been spending a lot of time and energy on building my own dreams. I was spending my time and energy helping somebody else build their dreams.
yeah, absolutely. So, I think a lot of people come from that same mentality, right? Everybody who is kind of in real estate in one way or another has that moment in their life where they realize they should be doing something a little bit more than just building somebody else's dream. So, kind of
Mhm.
walk us through that if you don't mind. Of what was it that really made you realize that this was kind of your calling card, was
Mhm.
real estate, and not continuing down the road? Because I would say from just looking at other people, the people who do move into building their own business are in the minority.
They are, yeah. And it's not trivial to start your own business, and it's not something you want to go into half-heartedly. You need to have some sort of driving purpose beyond just making money to start your own business. You need to have something that you really want to sink your teeth into and understand that there's going to be struggle along the way and that the struggle is worth it for you. In my case, I was in the corporate world and I'd always had this kind of nagging feeling that I really wanted to do something on my own, but I didn't have any ideas. I was not and am not a classic entrepreneurial personality. I just didn't have. I wasn't the kid that sold candy, played the arbitrage candy game at school and got in trouble for it. I don't have that story. I was instead raised in an environment where I was told to work hard and get a job so that I could not be poor. And that's what I did. Is I was good at math and science, so I got an engineering degree and got a marketable job, making something like 45 grand in the year 2000, which wasn't life changing money, but it was a lot of more money than my parents had made at the time. And so I had kind of changed my socioeconomic status by doing so. But at 22 years old, I got a job making, 40, 50 grand, whatever it was. And then I thought, is this really what I'm going to be doing for the next 40 years? Is this grind it? But I didn't really have an alternative. And it wasn't until 15 years into that career that I had kind of my wake up call moment where I was on a beach vacation and I asked for permission to extend that beach vacation another week because they'd had a cancellation and I had the money to pay for it. My kids were out of school. My wife's a stay-at-home mom, so her schedule was open. All I had to do was work from the beach house while the kids were down at the beach playing. My wife would watch them, and I would just work normal hours, but just from the beach house. And that phone call, which I thought was going to be just like a courtesy, what ended in, well, we don't do that here. I expect your ass back to work Monday at 8 o'clock. Click. Oh, okay. I guess I'm not staying another week. I guess I'm going back to work because I need this job. I was a single income family and I didn't really have the option of not working anymore. So that was kind of my moment that I realized I'm really not that important. This company treats me as disposable and expendable, and I don't rank that high. And I needed to find some alternative way to make my money so that I didn't have to be beholden to some corporation.
Yeah. I think it's a really, important part of everybody's journey is finding out finding out that you're not as important to the company as you think,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Right, because I think a lot of people when they have, high paying jobs or they're doing well in their current positions, it's really easy for them to just kind of stay very comfortable in that position. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people don't tend to make that switch is because they're comfortable, right? Would you say that's the case for you as well? Is that, it did take you 15 years, so in that 15 years, what was kind of keeping you, you know, doing what you were doing?
Complacency. Yeah. The corporate life is just not bad enough to switch because you make a decent income. I mean, your bills are comfortably cared for. I mean, you have disposable income, and it's not terrible. You just lose a little bit of your soul every year because they take a little bit away from you. They expect a little bit more. The benefits aren't quite as good as they used to be last year, and they just kind of work you into this, people call them golden handcuffs, but I would consider, like copper handcuffs. Like it's valuable, but it's not, you don't have this parachute unless you make it to the C level and you're like, the CFO, the COO, CEO, you're not going to get this golden parachute. You have a respectable income, but they're not sharing equity in the company with you in any meaningful way. And you are simply a cog in the machine. And as we've seen with how things go in the corporate world now, you're disposable. Like when it doesn't make sense for you to work anymore, then you suddenly find yourself on the other end of a layoff when you thought you've been doing a good job.
Right. And that's a really good point to bring up actually, because I think for many people who stay, with a W-2 job, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
the big reason is because you hear the word security being thrown around a lot.
Right.
But based on kind of what we've seen, right, having somebody else determine your paycheck is not necessarily the most secure thing
Right.
in the world. It's actually more secure creating your own income or at least supplemental income
Mm-hmm.
on the side, so that way you can provide even if the person writing your paychecks or signing
Right.
off on your paychecks says no more, right?
Yeah, I think it's incumbent on all of us to make a mad dash race to create some basic level of financial independence where you don't need a job to comfortably live for a few years. If you can save a percentage of your income and invest it in something else that you have equity in, whether it's stocks or real estate or a business that you start on the side, you want ownership. Like you're never going to retire. You're never going to be able to have independence unless you are making money outside of exchanging your time for money. And that's a trap we all get pulled into, is that we think the only way we can make money is by exchanging our most precious resource, which is time, for a dollar. And when we do so, we're giving up this very precious moment that we cannot renew for something that is almost infinitely renewable. And so it's a very unfair exchange of value when you think about it that way. And so it's a system that works because you are human capital. And when you think of yourself as being human capital, it's like, wait a second, I'm more valuable than that to myself, aren't I? And so what can I do to put myself in a position where if I want to work a job, that's fine, but I don't need to work a job.
Right. Absolutely. And I love that you said that as well, because, trading your time for income, even if it is in your own business,
Yeah.
right? You want to set up a way where you're not trading your time directly for an income.
Yes. Yes. Don't fall into the trap of being self-employed only to realize that's your new job. But it's even more demanding than working for a corporation.
Yeah, and you own your own job, right? And you're kind
Right.
of your own boss in that sense. And a lot of people are a lot harder on themselves
Yeah.
than even their companies are on.
Right.
So another question that I probably have, and I think a lot of people are thinking of themselves are, what if they don't have kind of that moment, right? I think it came about for you very
Mhm.
spontaneously as you were
Right.
planning this vacation, and then all of a sudden the company kind of just shut the door on your face.
Right.
But for a lot of people, they go 50, 60 years without having that, and they just kind of waste their life away. So what would you say to somebody like that who maybe they are running their own business and maybe just not
Mhm.
putting enough effort into it, or what does it take?
Well, it's a really good question. So, and that's the kind of the fundamental question we should be asking ourselves is kind of what are we here to do, and like what makes us tick? And the so sad reality is that so many people spend their entire lives not really living life for themselves. They lived life for somebody else. It's the most common regret of the dying when interviewed on their deathbed is like, I wish I had lived life more for myself, and I wish I hadn't worked as much. Those are the two most common regrets of people who are on their deathbeds. And so I think it's something we should take a lot of insight from. And so every single one of us are going to have some sort of moment in our lives where we realize that we haven't been doing things the way we probably should have been. Like we've missed some sort of call to action in our lives, and it will be some sort of interrupt in your life, whether it's like the beach story that I had, or being laid off, or having a health scare, somebody precious in your life dying, something bad news. You're going to get bad news someday. And it's just the reality of living life. And when that moment comes, you're going to have a new change of perspective. And my call to action for you is, why wait for this terrible moment to then reconsider your life and think, do I have my priorities straight? And that's ultimately you decide what your priorities are. But why wait for these big moments in your life that you don't know when they're coming and you're caught flat-footed? So I was caught very much unprepared. And I was very lucky that I started working on my plan to control my financial situation before I was laid off, because 2 years later, the story continues that I was laid off. Kind of 2 years into my 3-year exit plan, I had my feet on the edge of the cliff, and I was calculating if I could jump yet, and somebody came by and pushed me. And thankfully, I had already started, because I had the momentum necessary then to figure out how to build my plane before it crashed. So many of us will be on that edge, and we'll just get pushed off the edge with no warning, and we're just flailing and flapping, and we're going to crash and burn. And that's what I want to avoid.
Yeah, and I think everybody should avoid that as well. It's not, it's not if, it's when, right? So it's
Yep.
not if you're gonna get laid off, it's when, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
if something bad's gonna happen, it's when it's gonna happen. And
Right.
you want to get ahead of it, right?
Right.
Even if even if you don't build like an income in that time that can sustain you,
Sure.
you have built in that time skill sets, right? And in different ways of thinking
Right.
that you can use to take forward to build that income.
Right. Yeah. We build. We have time and talents, and we use those to make ourselves flexible, and gives us as many options as possible. And when you give yourself optionality, the whole point of having money is not to buy things. The whole point of having money is to give yourself options. And when you have options, then you can decide, I'm going to take a few years off. My mom just died, and I'm just not in a place um, to really think about work, and I want to spend time with my dad. I mean, these are stories that have happened in our lives personally recently, where people who are in their financial position were able to just say, you know what, I don't need this job right now. I'm not upset by anything. I just, this job is not my priority anymore. And they have the financial position to not go to work, and perhaps take a 1 to 2 year hiatus from work, and then reconsider and get perspective, and then think about what they're going to do with their life. A lot of people cannot afford to do that. Like something bad happens in their life, and they have, like, after the funeral, 3 days later of bereavement leave, they have to be back at it. Like, we had a terrible story of a person I used to work with at the old company, that her son tragically died in 3 days of bereavement leave, and she had to get back to work. It was a tragic, horrible accident, and nobody knew it was coming. And 10-year-old boy died. She had to go back to work.
That's terrible. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what doing these things, that's what's going to help you avoid these situations, right? Because,
Right.
I think it goes a lot beyond, like you said, just the money and what you can do with the money. It's more
Right.
about how much control we have over our own lives and
Right.
over our emotions, if you think about it. Because if you're forced to go back to work, I mean, it's one thing that you're spending time to out of your day to do that, but it's another, it's like, what is the emotional uh turmoil, if you will, of
Yes.
having to do that, of having to go back to the office and play office politics and be
Right.
stressed out about work and have people put more pressure on you when you're in that mindset, which nobody should be really in that position, if you think about it.
Right. Right. And the way the U.S. and much of the Western world, and the capitalist world, is set up, amazing things comes from that. But one of the costs of that is that you're human capital. And if your rights are fairly limited in the scheme of things. Some really good companies have some pretty decent policies. We have some regulations that make sure you have things like FMLA, but it's like there's a limit to that, and you're extremely vulnerable to the vicissitudes of life. There's going to be a curveball thrown at you, and our social safety network is there, but it's very basic. And I don't think we should be sitting around waiting for a corporation or a government to take care of you. I think we should all be working on creating our personal and our well-being, our financial situation, our mental health in such a way that we're anti-fragile. We can take the curveball of life and take it with limited stress, and we have an environment and an ecosystem that is set up to give us time to figure things out. And we're not given a lot of time by the way our work structure is set up in most cases.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I think, when life does throw a curveball, right, there's some people who are in a position to deal with it
Right.
with more grace than others, just simply because they can make certain choices that other people they just can't, or it's going to be a lot more difficult, right? Because
Right.
you're in a financially, I guess, independent position, you can make a lot of sacrifices that somebody who is in a position where they're not financially independent can't necessarily make, because it'll just, kind of tumble and snowball into a worse and worse situation.
Right.
So, yeah. So it's absolutely about, being able to have that control over your life,
Mm-hmm.
and taking the steps to do that. So speaking on that subject a little bit, you decided to kind of jump into real estate when you
Mm-hmm.
first realized that you need to be building your own business, and building your own income. So how did that decision come to be? What was
Mm-hmm.
it that made you jump into real estate, and maybe not one of the other 100,000 businesses that are out
Right.
there?
A lot of choices for sure. So when I was going through my exercise of figuring out, like, I've got to figure out another way to earn an income, and I want that choice to set me up to create financial independence, personal time freedom, and geographic freedom. And so I looked at things like starting my own business. I had no good ideas. I looked at buying a franchise. I looked at being an insurance agent for like State Farm or something. And every single one of those situations always felt like I was just buying myself another job. I didn't want to jump from the frying pan into the fire. So like, what else can I do? And I just thought, well, I've always kind of tinkered with the idea of maybe getting into real estate. Why don't I just buy a rental property and just see how it goes? So I kind of went down that train of thought of, let's look into what it takes to be a real estate investor. Of course, naturally, at the time, Bigger Pockets was one of the first things that shows up in a search. So did a lot of podcast listening and book reading, and I kind of thought, okay, the Burr method, that makes sense to me. I happen to live in a market where cash flow at the time in 2015 was pretty easy to come by, just without a lot of extra work. So let me just buy and try and find a rental property. And so I bought a rental property for like 30 grand and put $10,000 into it and did the Burr method. And I used private money to put for the 30 grand, and I used $10,000 of my own money and rented or got it rehabbed, rented it, refinanced it, got all my money back out, put my money back in my pocket, paid off my private lender, and was making a few $100s of cash flow per month, on paper. It's like, okay, like, that's the proof of concept. This thing works. This Burr method that Brandon Turner coined from Bigger Pockets, it's viable. Let me do that a few more times. And I think I went on to do like 18 of those in the next 18 months. And I just went on a tear buying rental properties in my area. I started flipping a few houses, started doing a little wholesaling, and I just kind of got hooked.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I think a lot of people do gravitate towards real estate because it's something that you can learn from people who've already done it in the past, right? There's a framework in place rather than having to learn something completely on your own.
Right.
And it's fairly passive, and there's a lot of benefits that come with it, as far as the wealth building and the tax benefits that comes with real estate. So you mentioned you started off with the Burr method, right? So aside from the fact that it was very popular on bigger podcasts at the time, and it probably still is.
Yeah.
Was there any other reason why that was just kind of like the way you decided to start it off? Do you suggest new investors to do the same? Or maybe if you were to go back, would that be something that you might have done a little bit differently?
I don't think I would have done anything differently at the time because it was a good market for buying real estate in 2015. So buying cash flowing properties was very attainable at the time. Interest rates were not the lowest they've ever been, but they were still comparatively lower than they are now in 2023 as we record this. So I liked the idea that I could just inch my way into the market. And so it allowed me to learn at a fairly slow pace, like what it takes to actually manage rental property. And it turns out I'm a terrible property manager. I have no business managing tenants, and I needed to hire help. I learned that lesson pretty quickly. I learned very quickly that I am not handy, don't care to be handy, and have no interest in swinging a hammer whatsoever. Like that, I needed to hire professionals to do that. It cost more in dollars, but it doesn't cost my time to go do it. And so I learned gradually what it took to run a business. I learned very way too late that I needed to hire a professional bookkeeper much sooner than I did. If anybody listening to this and you're in the business or any kind of business, you need to get your books in order. They're probably not. Hire a good bookkeeper. $50 to $70 an hour is worth it because they're fast and they're good, and they oftentimes will help you pay for themselves because they make filing taxes so easy. So that's a big lesson I learned very early is good. This is a good business to be in, but get your books in order because unless you're an accountant type, which I'm not, you're not going to do it right and you need help. So that's probably your first hire.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice there, because I think a lot of people, they don't. And maybe it's just because they don't want to think about it, right? I think it's
Yeah,
the least sexiest part of the business
I
is
agree.
bookkeeping, and they just kind of put it off until the very end, until they have to do it, and then when they do it, they're super stressed out because they
Right,
don't know what they're doing,
right,
but they also don't want to hire somebody to do it because they just feel like it's one of those necessary evils that
right.
it's not like a good investment even.
Yeah, that sounds like you're
Uh,
talking from experience right there.
right. Yeah, I think a lot of people have the same experience, right? As
Yeah.
far as being newer into the business. And that's probably another good point to talk about here is just, the mindset shift that you have to make being from an employee where, a
Hmm.
lot of things are kind of taken care of for you, right? Your benefits, you don't have to necessarily,
Hmm.
file your own taxes. You kind of just get the
Right.
form.
Yep.
Um, and moving into that, here is your business and you are the person responsible, not just for yourself, but everybody else that's, working within and around your business as well. So how much
Hmm.
was that as far as like a mindset shift that you had to make? Was it a little bit more gradual, like you said, because you didn't necessarily just jump in head first?
Yeah, that was a big transition for me when I was laid off from my job. I was already doing a business on the side, but I wasn't really relying on the income on the side to live off of. I was just taking the cash flow and what I was making and just reinvesting it back in the business. I wasn't having to pull a payroll off of that to live off of. So when I was laid off suddenly, I thought, oh, okay, I better start setting things up correctly. And during the process of learning how to become a full-time business owner and a no-time W-2 employee, there was a big mindset shift there because every 2 weeks that uh, paycheck was not deposited in my checking account, and I had to like create that system for myself. I had to figure out the process of setting up a W-2 like payroll structure from my own company to myself. And one thing you'll learn in rental properties is that the expenses come in very consistent dribs and drabs, but then the expenses come in big surges. So you can be very careful that you think you have a lot of money and turns out you actually don't, because you need that money for repairs, or you need that money to file taxes, or you need that money to, cover some sort of expense, or, you're paying your annual insurance or whatever. And so you want to like learn the profit first system for real estate so that you're not making the classic mistake of looking at the bank account balance as the way to budget for your business. That's a very common mistake that I did make it a while until I figured out the profit first system.
Right. I think money management, right, is the biggest
Oh,
hurdle for a
yeah,
lot of people. Because before, I mean, if you're working a job, the people don't manage money, right? Even entrepreneurs and self-employed individuals don't manage their money as much as they should. But
right.
that's the most important part of creating financial freedom, because there's people out there who they might not even run a business, but because they manage their money correctly, they are able to be financially free a lot earlier than
Right.
other individuals that are out there.
Hmm. Yeah. That's a thing that we're not really taught in school anymore. We used to have this like concept of home economics, like that's not even taught anymore. And we're sure not really taught how to deal and run the economics of a business. We talk about things at a very academic level in most of our education program in the US and probably the world. It's very, very impractical. It's so in your head and academic and theoretical. And like nobody knows how to even apply for an EIN, much less get a business bank account set up, or certainly how to do cash flow management, run a P&L, or read a balance sheet. They have no idea what these things mean. I know people who have gone through business school and have taken accounting classes, and they in reality have no idea what those things mean.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's even if going to business school, right? A lot of people feel like that they're going into it, that they're going to learn how to run a business, but then they come out of it knowing nothing and being the perfect person to help somebody else run their business.
Right.
I think
They
that's the point of that.
they train employees. I mean, that's what our academic educational system is very much designed around creating the next round of employees. They are not, probably a few exceptions, but for the most part, we're not being taught how to be a clever business owner and how to create what a product market fit and how to run A/B tests and how to run Facebook ads and how to actually think like a business owner. Very few applications of the education program I've ever seen that actually helps people learn those skills.
Yeah, I haven't seen any that are currently out there. I mean, but it is important, right? Getting into business, you have to do the education on your own in a way.
You
So
do.
you mentioned a lot of the books that you read, Profit First, and
Mhm.
some other books that really helpful for a lot of business owners that are out there. So what was kind of like the education process, for you, educating yourself on all these things? Obviously bigger pockets and listening to
Yep.
podcasts. Was there like a structured way? Or did you just kind of dive into all of this information and then just kind of pulled out whatever you needed when you do needed them?
Yeah, I exercised my curiosity. I think we really need to lean into, okay, I want to know how to run the numbers on a rental property. Where's a book that talks about that? And read two or three different versions of it and understand that there are different philosophies around that. I know we all want to hear the answer on how to do everything, and there's rarely an answer that is always 100% right. There's like philosophies and schools of thought on how to even run numbers on a rental property, something in the scheme of things, but it's pretty simple. There's a lot of opinions on that, and like you need to go do your research and read everything you can. And I think that is the fundamental nature of any kind of entrepreneur is you got to go figure stuff out. Like I don't know how to run Facebook ads. Go figure out how to run Facebook ads. I don't know how to write a good copy on a website. I need to go figure out how to do that. Do I even know how to stand up a website? Go find some tool that lets you stand up a website. And it doesn't mean you have to like actually know WordPress or actually know HTML or any of the software languages, but there are a lot of tools that allow you to create these things very easily. But you need to learn those tools. These codeless Squarespace, that sort of stuff. Go learn one of those. Pick one. Get a website stood up, and in 20 hours you can learn most things good enough to have something viable in the marketplace.
You're right. Absolutely. And I love that you brought up, the fact that there is no one answer to a solution or a problem that somebody has, especially in running your own business, because there isn't, right? There is
Mm-mm.
so many different people with different types of thinking that are successful in their own right, that it can sometimes create a situation where if the person isn't necessarily very savvy in the ways of educating themselves as a business owner, see that, oh, there's, there's conflicting information here. But
Yeah.
it's but that's the cool thing about it, is that you can have all these different possibilities and different avenues to be successful, But, and I think, you could probably touch on this a little bit is, would you say that, it all starts from what your end goal is, and you have to have a very clear picture of what it is that you want to create with your business that can provide for you, so that you can
Mhm.
then work backwards and then pick the school of thought or create your own from picking all the different ones that you're learning from, and then just run with it that way.
Yeah, you definitely want to start with the end in mind. The classic advice from the start with your end state and think 5 or 10 years out. What kind of life do you want to be able to lead in 5 or 10 years? And then spend the next 5 years living lean and learning a ton and finding what you can do in the marketplace that somebody's willing to pay you for, whether that's running a rental property, or running your own business, or consulting, or whatever your discipline or niche is. Pick a discipline, a niche that you enjoy doing, something that you're curious about, something that the market has demonstrated that they're willing to pay for, and then get really good at providing that service or product at amazing quality. And then once you figure out those things, okay, now build the system around it so that I can replicate this and then scale it. I mean, that's kind of the order of added, order of operations that you're going to go through. And you may have to start and stop a few times. I've started and stopped at several businesses because I found I just wasn't a good fit. I was doing a fair amount of one-on-one coaching for a while, and I enjoyed it, but I'm an introvert. And when I would talk to somebody one-on-one like you and I are doing here, and I'm coaching you and I'm on Zoom for an hour, afterwards I would be exhausted. I mean, my tank was just run dry. And then I'm supposed to get on another call with somebody else to try and sell them that service. I wasn't there. I mean, I mentally wasn't there. And I found that I do a lot better in the one to many kind of mastermind format, where I have some space to hear other people talk. And I can still give advice, I can still help, but and it makes less per person probably, but I'll probably make more per hour doing that than if I were doing one-on-one coaching. But for some people, they may like the intensity of the one-on-one coaching and they want to take somebody under their wing and help them grow. That might be a good fit for you. So a lot of it depends on your personality, what lights you up, and that's going to be different for all of us. And so you really want to find that thing in your life that you just is so purpose driven. I just really like doing it. It's still going to be hard as hell. Do not think that I'm saying that you can go out and do anything and just follow your passion and whatever is easy. I do. No. You find something that is just like, I can do this and I feel good helping people do this, and I'm going to work through the struggle, even though you're successful despite the struggle. Like, you think the struggle is worth it. Anything worth doing is going to be difficult and require sacrifice.
I love that. I love that you said that. You have to pick something where you're willing to continue despite all the challenges,
Yeah.
right? And because challenges are unavoidable,
Yep.
it doesn't matter if you're working for somebody else or working for yourself, and it doesn't matter what type of business you're in. There's no easiest business that's out there if you think about it, right? I'm sure there are a lot of people who are Googling right now, what's the easiest business to start, or what's the easiest way to get financial freedom in real estate. There isn't one,
Right.
right? Maybe subjectively there is, but then again, it gets back to what you were saying. You have to know yourself and know what you're comfortable with and what is it that's really driving you, so that way, to you individually, specifically, the path that you're following is quote unquote the easiest way, because you're able to stand your ground, if you will, and continue pushing forward despite all the challenges that are coming your way.
That's it.
Right. Absolutely. So just one, kind of moving on into, a different part of what you're doing now, obviously you mentioned a little bit about, some of the coaching that you're doing. So what was
Mhm.
it, as far as what part of your career that you made it realize that you kind of want to make a shift to, from just being an investor yourself to also coaching others and helping others and kind of sharing that knowledge forward?
Yeah, I just love to learn. And when I have someone to share it with, it gives me all the more motivation to learn it better. And I don't know what it is about me, but even when I was in, junior high and high school, when I would learn something, I would then share it with my classmates. And that's how I helped reinforce what I learned. And that's just something I've always done. And, you kind of do this kind of self introspection of, what are the things I enjoy doing? What are the things I can talk about effortlessly? What are the things that I did even as a child? And that's one of the things that I did, is I shared information, and I just find myself learning something and I just can't help but tell somebody about it. And when I would go to a conference, somebody would hear me talking about something and like, oh, what you just set up and what you're talking about sounds kind of cool. Is that something you can show me? Sure. And so I would do a Zoom call afterwards and show them. And they were like, well, that's amazing. Like, I've got to pay you for that. I was like, oh, no, don't worry about it. And when that happens 2 or 3 times and someone says, that was so amazing, that was life changing. You gotta, like, let me pay you for that. You start saying, okay, maybe I have a service people want to pay for.
Right. Absolutely. And it does start that way a lot, right? With just, you
Yeah.
being successful in something that you're doing. And then there's just a lot of people who are gravitated towards that, so that you
Right.
start sharing what you've learned and the things that you're doing. And eventually there's just going to be so many people who are asking you for advice or asking you, for different things, different frameworks that are working your business,
Right.
that you have to charge for it, because it's not even worth your time to talk to so many people at the same time. But at the same time, you still want to help people, so you just have to make a business out of it.
Yeah, and if it's something that you really enjoy doing, and you find yourself really getting excited about providing that product or service, and then people are paying you for it, like, okay, well, maybe I have something. And then you may also find that, okay, people are willing to pay me for it, but I don't actually like fulfilling or delivering on this. Like in my case, the one-on-one coaching, I did that for a while. I mean, made decent money doing it, but it's like, and the people that I helped coach, most of them I really liked. I mean, like, some of them are still good friends of mine, and I would consider them clients in other respects, but I didn't really enjoy that pattern. It wasn't a good fit for me. So, there's this concept of product market fit. Well, is there a service and delivery fit? Like, am I the guy that really needs to be doing this, or no, do I need to find something else that is more in tune with my personality and my values? And so, you just got to kind of discover that, and you don't know until you try it for a while. And that's why I think it's really good to run these little tiny experiments with really defined outcomes that you can run super quickly. Okay, I don't know. I'm going to try an Airbnb. What's the lightest way possible that I can try and run an Airbnb and figure out if I like it? Well, you can be somebody else's co-host. You can say, hey, I'll help you manage your Airbnb for you, but I'll do the work and you just let me be your co-host. I don't have to pay anything for that. I just go learn how to be a co-host. You may find out you're really good at it. You may hate, you may come to find out that you hate it. Well, I'd rather find out now by helping somebody else than I've bought 10 properties and turned them to Airbnbs and realize I hate it.
That's actually really good advice, right? Just kind of doing it on a small scale with really specific outcomes that you're looking
Mm-hmm.
for, so that way you can actually know whether or not this is something you want to do, or you're even good at doing, or if it's even going to give you the results that you want, before jumping just headfirst into it and then being so deep in that you can't pull yourself out.
Yeah. The example that I've heard that captures that probably better than anything is if you're really into cooking and you think that you want to run some sort of catering or restaurant business, cater somebody's party a couple times. Or if you're like, okay, well, then maybe I'll host parties at my house. Okay, now maybe I'll get a food truck. And then, okay, now the food trucks are doing well. Maybe I'll actually do a restaurant. Don't jump into the $150,000 restaurant before you've actually catered anybody's party at their house first. Like, eke your way into it to figure out what part of this business you actually like.
Right, because for a lot of people, right, they don't realize that point is, the business is a little bit different than just doing the one thing
Yeah.
that's a part of the business.
Right.
So, yeah. Well, awesome, Paul. I really appreciate you being here today and sharing your knowledge. I think what you had to share is super helpful for many different people, whether they're already running their business, or maybe they're thinking about jumping into running their business, or maybe they're part-time, right? And they're kind of teetering between the two and seeing whether or not
Mhm.
it's worth it for them to put more effort into it. For anybody who is listening or watching this that want to know more about your coaching programs, or want to follow you and just kind of follow your journey, what
Mhm.
are some of the best ways or best platforms people do follow you on, or to kind of check out your content?
Sure. So I have a website, pauldavidthompson.com, and I'm at Paul David all at Paul David Thompson on TikTok and Instagram.
Awesome. We'll make sure to leave that in the description and the show notes down below. But other than that, Paul, I want to thank you again for being on the show. And before we let you sign off, is there any last pieces of advice, any last tips you want to leave with us here today?
Go for it. There is something that is calling you right now. You're like, I really should write that book. I really should try this side hustle. I really should ask that person out. I mean, there's something right now that is calling you, and you're doubting yourself, and you're wondering if you're worth it, if you're good enough for it, etc. And figure out a way to do the smallest type of experiment possible to see if that's something that you'd really enjoy. If you're thinking about writing a book, start writing a blog or a weekly newsletter, and just start writing. Start creating something that is on your heart, and you'll find very quickly if that's something that you're going to commit to, or if it's just a pipe dream. And it's okay. Pipe dreams happen. No big deal. But you'll find sooner or later that there is something that's holding you back. Fear, doubt, worry, concern is keeping you from doing the thing that you could be.
Absolutely. That's some great advice. Paul, thanks again for being here. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on the next show. Take care.